Yesterday on November 30th, 2023, the Pogues frontman Shane MacGowan died at the age of 65. MacGowan was born on Christmas Day in 1957 in England to Irish immigrant parents. It was his Irish heritage that went on to influence him most in his artistic life. Growing up, while he was a good student, he ultimately ended up getting kicked out of school due to drug possession. It was substance abuse that started early for him. After being kicked out of school, he considered becoming a priest, but then he found punk music and it transformed him. That love for punk brought him to a Clash concert in 1976, where he was photographed, bloodied face, holding his ear, and ended up in the paper. It was not long after this, in 1977, that MacGowan ended up in his first band, the Nipple Erectors, or later known as just the Nips. It was 5 years later when he formed the band that he'd be most known for, the Pogues. He started it with Nips bandmate James Fearley and occasional bandmates in the Millville Chainsaws, Peter Spider Stacy and Jim Finer. The band was initially named the Pogue Mahone, a play on Kiss My Arse in Irish, which later of course turned into just the Pogues. MacGowan has said that starting the Pogues was his version of joining the IRA, of which he lamented that he never had the guts to join. He also wanted to bring something a little different to the punk scene, really the rock scene. He'd kind of become tired of what he was hearing when it came to rock music. So he brought Irish folk and punk together, Celtic punk as it were. It was Irish folk with anger, bringing in traditional Irish instruments with a punk aesthetic. The Pogues released their first album in 1984, Red Roses for Me, which was well liked critically and hit the top 50 in the UK charts. Their sophomore offering, Rum Sodomy and the Lash, was even better received both critically and commercially. It ended up peaking 13 in the UK and hitting the charts of a few others as well. But it was the third one, If I Should Fall with Grace from God, that was the charm. It's considered their seminal album and is the band's best-selling as well, hitting number 3 on the UK charts and hitting the top 10 in several others. The album spawned the band's biggest hit, Fairy Tale of New York, which featured Kirsty MacColl, which happens to be a Christmas song and is sure to get extra airplay this holiday season. During this time, MacGowan's substance abuse, which he'd had since childhood when his parents would give him Guinness to fall asleep, was causing problems, most notably with the band, where he wouldn't show up or would be unable to perform, with the Clash's Joe Strummer having to fill in. It was in 1988 that he collapsed due to hepatitis, with the doctor telling him that he had to stop drinking. He did not. In 1990, the Pogues released Hell's Ditch, which would be the last with MacGowan on vocals. They would go on to release one more. The reason it was his last is while they were touring the album, he was kicked out after repeatedly not showing up whilst on tour. Again, with the Clash's Joe Strummer having to fill in. MacGowan later stated that he had hated what the Pogues had become and the band themselves. They didn't really get along while they were on tour. He ended up forming Shane MacGowan and the Popes, teaming up with the band The Popes, who were just a band in their own right. They released 2 albums, neither of which hit the zeitgeist quite like the Pogues albums did. It was in 2000 that MacGowan was arrested for drug possession. It was actually Sinead O'Connor that turned him in, hoping that it would get him off of heroin, which it did, though at the time he was quite angry with her, but after time he came to appreciate what she did. Not long after that, in 2001, he rejoined the Pogues, of which they actually stayed together until 2014 and broke up again and MacGowan talked about how they were good friends as long as they weren't on tour together. In 2018, he married Victoria Mary Clark, who he had known since he was 24 and she 16. His health at this time had gone downhill. It was actually in 2015 that he took a fall and broke his pelvis and had been in a wheelchair since then. But in December 2022, he was diagnosed with viral encephalitis. And a year later, he died at his home of pneumonia yesterday on November 30th, 2023. Shane MacGowan's legacy lives on in his songs, of course, but specifically in his lyrics. He's considered by some, revered by some, as one of the great lyricists. It's also where and what he brought the listeners to, the places and the experiences. While part of the punk genre, you didn't need to be an angsty teen to get it, to relate to it. MacGowan made that a priority, that anyone could listen to one of his songs and relate. That is just a quick rundown of Shane MacGowan. There's plenty of other more in-depth, there's a biography you could check out if you are interested. And I'd love to hear where you heard the Pogues for the first time or any of Shane MacGowan's music. Also leave your experiences with that music, and if you have any memories associated, good or bad. I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this that can relate. And hopefully if you've made it this far, you've learned a little something, whether you've been a fan for decades or you've just heard about Shane MacGowan. And hopefully if you have just learned about him, you'll go check out some of his musical endeavors. Thanks, and have yourself a good one.